My name's Steve Wallace. I've been at DISA for about 8 years. Gotten to work on many interesting things. We've recently stood up this emerging technology directorate. And the purpose of this new directorate is to be really embedded with the agency and understand the agency's challenges. So we previously had about 3 different groups within the agency that focused on innovation, CTO style activities. And one was the former CTO's office, the other one was the cyber innovation group, and a third was, they focused on JCTDs, but they were actually originally a function of the CTO's office. They got spun about as we reorganized. But bottom line is there were 3. And we were working together, but oftentimes in each other's backyards, and we weren't as efficient as what we felt we needed to be. So we stood up this emerging technology group. So it's broken down into 3 separate divisions: innovation support, collaboration and defense, as well as infrastructure. And if you know much about the way that DISA as an agency is structured, it falls in line with that. So the innovation support group, if you look at it, their function is to focus on some of the supporting elements of the agency. So the small business office, for one, they're to interact and understand the small business office and integrate well with that. That group is run by Rick I. Barber. Then you have the collaboration and defense group, and that's a thinly veiled name for the development and business center. In the development and business center, you have the cyber directorate as well as the services development directorate. So that's basically our collaboration and defense. That's run by Carlton Harris. And then finally, you have the infrastructure directorate, which is focused on the operations and sustainment center within the agency, and that one's run by Charlie Fields. And they're to focus on our SE, which is a lot of that is the ecosystem, as well as the transport side of the agency, which is our IE, the infrastructure executive. So one of the things, I skipped past the tenets there, but one of the things, driving principles for this group is practical approaches and simplicity. We're not DARPA. We're not trying to be DARPA. The DoD already has a DARPA, right? So we're looking for things that are a little closer to the sled, if you will, 3 to 5 years from deployment, more of an integration and innovative integration kinds of tasks. So we're not, the example I always give to the team is let's talk about flying, or let's not talk about flying cars, let's talk about self-driving cars, right? Things that are closer. But we are looking for some things that are potentially cutting edge, things that haven't been done in the department before, different ways of approaching problems. We'll touch on a few of those here in a minute. Things that we already have in the hopper and some of the places that we're thinking about right now. And that bottom bullet, that third bullet, is to align the technologies to the agency's priorities. When we stood up this group, there's really 2 models for innovation groups within an organization. You can have a standalone R&D group that strictly focuses on R&D, right? And they're separate and they're into themselves, and the goal is to eventually turn out products that are integrated in. But there's challenges associated with that in my mind. When you get too separated, you get too insular, you get too into your own way of doing things. And we wanted to be a little different. We went with a smaller group approach, and that is more integrated into an organization. And what you're doing is basically reaching in, partnering, understanding their challenges, and then working very closely to develop prototypes and then turn technologies out. So that's the foundational tenets between this new group that we're going into now. So it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. We just have a couple more slides, and then I really wanted to make this more interactive. So next slide, please. So these are some of the, and I guess that's, well, it's a little bit bigger here. These are a few of the things that we're working on right now. One of the biggest ones, I can't get into a ton of detail about it, but we can talk about browser isolation. And browser isolation, I'm pretty proud of that one because that's an example of us looking at the problem differently, right? So DISA runs at what we call our internet access points. We run the cyber stacks that defend the entire department from everything that occurs as bits traverse from the internet into NIPRNet. And there's a lot of things that go on in those stacks, and it's constantly a cat and a mouse game. It's constantly we're looking at what's going on out there in terms of threats on the internet, and then how do we defend against them. And frankly, we spend a lot of money doing that. So we, about 2 years ago, started looking at what technologies were available to help us approach that problem differently. So we were working with a couple of companies at the time, and the idea was, what if you could do that browsing outside of NIPRNet and actually give the user a video representation of that browsing? So then if it all goes sideways, it goes sideways out there. It doesn't go sideways on our own networks. So we're in the process, we're going through an acquisition right now using the other transactional authority to get after that one. So we're in the process of doing that right now. The next up, we'll go clockwise here, software-defined networks, right? And so this is SDN, and I need to change this slide because we say networks there, but it's really the enterprise. Moving the enterprise to more of a software-driven enterprise, right? So we have a lot of folks that focus on command line. We've got a lot of folks that focus on manual tasks, that kind of thing. We really need to get away from the way, from those ways of interacting with the machines and move to really a software-driven plane. And and I don't like using the term networks there, even though that's the, sort of the industry accepted term. We switched it to enterprise mainly because it's not just about the networks. It's about the compute. It's about the way that we receive ideas. So when from the time that a good idea comes into the agency until we deliver, and then the life cycle after that, it's all got to be software-driven. Kind of the example that I give to folks, and easily reconfigurable, is many years ago you looked at the radio in your car and there were hard defined buttons, right? There was an AM FM button, there was presets, that kind of thing. You look at any modern car, it's a screen, it's all software driven. That company, that vendor can deliver to you a completely different interface in no time flat, either adding features, taking features away, making the thing operate differently. And that's really what we're trying to do around the entire enterprise. So we've got a lot of work going on right there. We're in the midst of looking at what orchestrators we can provide to the infrastructure. As we speak, I actually just came from a briefing about our global orchestrator and our approach. Agile and resilient gray networks. So on the gray networks, this one's really interesting in kind of blurring those lines of separation between NIPRNet and CIPRNet, and how do we provide, not just the senior leadership, but also down to the warfighter level with access to that CIPRNet in a more attainable manner. Right? So how do we get there? What's the network infrastructure that we have to use, and how can we start to blur those lines but do it securely? At the bottom, assured identity. So this one's an umbrella program. We've been doing this one for a couple of years. With assured identity, there were 2 initial programs that we started with. It was actually one of the first OTAs that we did. We looked at behavioral interaction, so behavioral authentication. So we watched how the users interacted with the machine, right, with the computer. We did a real live test with our privileged users, our system administrators, where we loaded something onto the machines, and then we built a profile around that user and how they interacted with the machine. So their dwell time at a given key, flight time between keys, how they use the mouse. It built a profile about that user, and then in the background constantly compared that user's interaction to that profile. So today we have the Common Access Card. We've had the Common Access Card for 15 years, and the CAC has served us very well. It still continues to serve us well. But the challenge with the CAC is I can take that CAC, hand it to you, here's my PIN, go to town, right? Or I get up, walk away from my computer, I'm still logged in, somebody sits down and goes to town. So we're looking at other aspects. We call it continuous multi-factor authentication. So how can I continuously authenticate that user? About a year and a half ago, we released we did a contract with a chipset manufacturer, and we looked at doing a very similar thing on the mobile devices. So how can we use the GPS antenna? How can we use the accelerometers in the device? How can we use all those kinds of things to, again, build a profile about that user and watch as they move around. Are they in a trusted location? Are they not in a trusted location? Build a risk score using the plethora of sensors that are on those devices to then continuously authenticate that user, so that if I set that phone down on a park bench and walk away from it unlocked, I can be assured that within a small period of time, that risk score will collapse, and then that phone will lock and become unusable. So those are, we have 50 devices that we received from the manufacturer, and we're going through our testing right now. The end goal is to produce a reference architecture, not just for consumption by the department, but that reference architecture consumable by anybody, down to the handset manufacturers, down to the chipset manufacturers, would be able to leverage the technology. AI and machine learning. AI and machine learning is a couple of the concepts that I've described here actually leverage some type of machine learning. We talked about the behavioral authentication. That was machine learning right there, because you're building a model. You've got that algorithm to build that model, and you're constantly comparing that model. And the mobile device as well was using some level of machine learning. So we're looking at how machine learning and AI applies to everything that we do, whether it be cyber defense, whether it be some of those things that we do with the SDN. So how does the network self-heal when we run into issues? Let's say the transport side of the network. How do we deal with a network that's constantly, in flux and changing? We can leverage some portion of machine learning and AI to deal with that. So we're looking at how that applies. We're also working with the newly formed Joint Artificial Intelligence Center down under the DoD CIO's office. So we've got a good partnership with them, working with where they're going and where we see our need to go with our particular set of products. The final one that I have here is the mobile desktop convergence. And the purpose behind this one is we're looking at how, the most modern mobile devices, actually, let me go about it this way. Most desktop devices have more horsepower than what any user actually needs, right? There's more going on that box than what any of us in this room need. We're not doing hardcore CAD. We're not doing, anything, heavy-duty processing. Most users need, an office suite, a web browser, email client, that kind of thing. And to be frank, the mobile devices have matured to the point now where that horsepower is on those devices and it's freely available, and it can be leveraged. So we're looking at ways that how can we take that handset, drop it into a docking station, and then allow the user to have a desktop experience, and then grab it, walk out the door, and leverage that device once they're outside. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. We've got a pilot going on right now within my group to focus on that. We're using Samsung's DeX appliances to sort of get us there, but we're interested in what's going on in that space. So those are really the highlights as we're standing this group up. To be frank, we're still maturing. We're still working through some of the organizational functions, but I'm pretty excited about where it's going. The one thing that I really wanted to point out earlier on, when I was introduced, my title is the Systems Innovation Scientist at the agency, and it's an interesting title. Probably wouldn't have been my first choice, but that's just like your birth name, right? That's the one you're given, and that's the one you're going to live with. But what's really cool about that position, and I'm very, very proud to be it, it's the first one in DISA. So within the government, you have the Senior Executive Corps, the SESs, and then you also have these things that are lesser known called STs and SLs. And this particular position is an ST, and the point here being is that our director has seen fit to make a heavy investment in engineering and innovation within this agency, and I really want to drive that point. That was one of her core tenets coming in. I'm hoping that this is not the last ST within this agency. I'm hoping there are many more. But what it also gives is our civilian engineers, we now have a clear pathway in terms of our career progression, and I think that it'll mean that we'll retain more and we'll grow a stronger engineering core in the agency. So I just wanted to point that fact out before we kind of moved on. So it's fairly exciting what we're doing here. So next slide. So this is my plug for our small business office. You guys all know why you're here, so I probably don't need to read through each one of these bullets. But our group has a tight bound, like I mentioned, through our innovation support group, Rick I. Barber. We have a tight bound to the small business office, and we really look forward to working with them as well as working with all of you. We need an injection of fresh ideas, right? So our group does not survive, we do not thrive if we don't bring new ideas to the table, to the folks that are actually having to deliver the products within the agency. So, we're looking for a close partnership with the small business office, with the other supporting elements in the agency to move forward and deliver some things. So with that, we've got time for a ton of questions from you guys. Yeah, but she's bringing you the mic.
Hi there. And would you talk a little bit about how you define success for your organization, and then maybe specifically about how you would like to engage with the small business community to help you drive that success?
Okay. So defining success for our organization, and our group, we're not out for the glory, right? And I've tried to convey that to our folks. There should be no glory in our role, right? If anything, the glory should go to the programs and the organizations within this agency that are delivering the capabilities. When we're successful, it's that they've delivered a capability that we've partnered with them on, and there's been a set of knowledge transfer and things we've moved the ball, if you will. We've looked a lot, and I've tried to talk with the group internally about how do we get to those metrics, about how do we, so I can turn around to my bosses and say, look, we've actually done something. And we're working through that now to define what those metrics are. And it's not really easily defined. Our role is not, our role is more difficult to define than that, I believe. In that, that was a great question. No, it was, but no, it really is. I mean, and in my mind, we don't end up with any glory. We should be able to get in and influence and get something done, and then be out and on to the next thing by the time that takes off. Our role is over once we've prototyped something and we're moving it on to production. So by the time that it really truly sees success, we're on to the next thing. So our goal is really just to provide value to the rest of the, to the other programs. And I think that's a self-feeding kind of thing. You help them do a better job, you help them deliver more, more product, then they're more likely going to trust you down the line to say, okay, yeah, let's get involved in more things. So, and then how can you be more interactive? How can we get more interactive? It really, the pathway and the portal is through the SBO, and actually on that, and I've said it to a number of audiences, but when we have conversations about technology, from my perspective, I can hear the hype all day long, right? I can go anywhere and see the hype. I've had a number of conversations at this point around 5G. And I'm not knocking 5G. 5G is going to do us a lot of benefit. But every time I turn around, I hear the hype about 5G. Just last week, I was on the phone on a conference call with some folks, and one government agency is talking about how they're going to use 5G with the mining industry to send probes down into the mines to provide safer mining for the miners. And in my mind, I'm sitting there going, well, that's cute, but I can't step onto an elevator shaft with my phone and keep a signal. How am I going to go into a mine shaft 100 feet below ground and expect to maintain a signal? But and there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, 5G is there's a lot of benefits, but there's a lot of drawbacks as well. We haven't even hit the peak of LTE-A, right? The upper bound in terms of LTE-A is about a gigabit of throughput. right? Most people don't realize that, but you never see that on your handset, right? Because that's under the most perfect lab conditions will you ever see that kind of throughput. The upper bound of 5G is between 10 and 20 gigs. I've heard different reports, but you will likely only see that in the most perfect of lab scenarios. So what I'm asking for, though, is let's have honest conversations about technology. Don't come tell us that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread and that we don't need to know anything more. I want to know the drawbacks, too. Let's have an adult conversation about this, but I want to hear the good and the bad. Because if you come in and you leave me with only the good, I'm naturally going to, at the end of, when we're done, go, oh, all right, there's something that they're not telling me here. There's more to this story, right? So that would be, in my mind, the best, because the other side of it, too, is in my prior jobs, I would spend a lot of time. SDN was probably the one that really put me over the top because some vendors came in and talked to senior leadership about SDN. And then it turned into, just go buy some SDN. And you can't look at it. It's not a singular thing, right? You don't buy it, put it into the data center, and puppy dogs and rainbows come out, and suddenly life is better. The reality is that SDN is really it's a wholesale change to everything that you do. So, I would spend a lot of my time deprogramming folks after the vendors walked out the door. But, having honest, open conversations is really the best. From my perspective, I appreciate that more than anything. When a vendor comes in and gives me the whole skinny, the good, bad, the ugly, I have a much better sense that they understand. The other thing is, the question I always like to ask the vendors, no matter what. SDN was the other place where I asked this one the first time. Is a lot of the vendors will come in and they'll tell you again all the great and wonderful things. And then I love to ask the question, so how are you doing this within your own companies? And the first time I asked that vendor turned 3 shades of white, and they had no answer because they weren't. So how are you going to tell me about a technology when you're not necessarily doing it yourselves, right? So, and you don't necessarily have to be, but let's again just have an open conversation about it. If you're not, that's fine. In a lot of smaller organizations, it doesn't make sense. But when we're talking about certain things, see how it applies to your particular organization, because I'd really like to hear how it went within your own, within your own boundaries. So, does that answer your question? Okay. This gentleman and then that gentleman in the back. Go ahead.
Hi, so the particular specifics of that interaction you're talking about. So how do we get in front of you or your staff to talk about new ideas, new innovations perhaps you haven't even thought of? Do we go to the SBO and then they
Yes.
make an appointment?
Yeah, so the SBO is often the group that triages that first interaction. So they'll triage it and make sure that they're not going to go after you technically, but they're going to, do you actually have something legitimate to bring to the table, sort of check it out, do that initial triage, and then they'll get engaged with my office, and then we'll pull a meeting together and we'll all sit down. And I have folks in my group that like I said, like the Rick Eyes of the world and Carlton, depends on what area you're at, then we would pull in the appropriate folks to be part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Following up on that gentleman's comment, are you open to like an industry RFI where you would just advertise further outside to say the people in this room? But he did steal my question, first and foremost, by the way.
So you're talking as we run into ideas that we're looking to pursue? Yeah, so we've done RFIs in the past. The browser isolation one, we did one back in the summertime where we were really, it was a two-way street. We wanted to see what industry had to say, and we also wanted to better understand what was our business case adding up within the agency. So we do RFIs now and again. In fact, I talked about the orchestration thing just before I walked in here. You will likely see something come around about the global orchestrator within the not too distant future. So yeah, the RFI thing is big for us because I'm always worried about calling it, we call it the self-licking ice cream cone, right? So we'll get an idea in our head and we'll iterate on that idea, but if we don't have some sort of external feedback, we likely won't come up with the right answer. So.
Quick follow-up, so should we just send the, to Carlin, should we? Is that, and a detail what area of interest you may have here, or what's the thought?
Carlin says yes, so Steve says yes.
So where do you see the primary motivator for your shop? Is it increased efficiency? Is it decreased cost? Is it provide better service to the warfighter? And on the second part of the question is, where do you see the role of small business directly supporting your organization? Because obviously we're not developing big things like 5G, but we can do specific things to for a government customer.
Yep. So, so the first part of your question, I'd say all of the above, right? So, we need to provide value across the board for the agency and for the department. Our focus is generally on the agency because the agency's focus is the department. A lot of times when we're inside of the programs, and so I've been in a number of the programs, and you're faced with, I've got to deliver by this date, and I got my head down, and I'm just trying to make it through the day and you know, not get myself in trouble. And so they often don't have the time to look at what in the heck is going on out in the rest of the world and see what might be happening that applies. And so our role is to sit side saddle with those folks, understand what their problems or their challenges are, and then be those people that then turn around and say, take the survey and, hey, what's going on out in the rest of the world? And then be able to swivel back around in that chair and get back with those folks and say, all right, look, I understand that you're doing this. Maybe we could do X, Y, and Z, help you deliver faster, help you deliver more securely, those kinds of things. So, you know, I think as we were standing it up, that was the primary goal in my mind, is to help relieve some of that off of the programs so that they can focus on doing their jobs, but also get that injection of ideas as things progress. And I'm sorry, there was the second part.
Role of small business.
Role of small business. Yeah, I think the role of small business is huge for us because it's that diversified thinking. Okay, it's not the big corporate kind of thought. You know, a lot of you guys come from different niches, and yeah, I'm not looking for you to come in the door and talk to me about, you know, you're not going to implement 5G clearly, right? But, you know, do you have some experience where others have leveraged, I mean, probably not 5G at this point, but X technology, right? So, but in my mind, it's really that more diverse thinking set than what you might get from one of the larger integrators. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Oh, yes, sorry.
It's okay.
Right in front of me.
And sort of piggybacking off of this question, with regard to the 6 innovation focuses that you spoke about, with small businesses, could you speak a little bit to what specific solutions you might be looking for within those areas that small businesses might be able to provide for you?
Okay. Within the 6 that we had up there, I don't have anything specifically. You know, there's probably a lot to be done there in the AI and machine learning side. There's, trying to think, the SDN, you know, I would imagine that there's a number of, and I'm trying to think of some of the small businesses that we work with right now, right? So we've done a lot with them, say on the SDN side in terms of canvassing even just the research of what's going on out there, what's real, what's not, some of that integration testing, some of the finer defining of some of the APIs we've used some of the small businesses for. On the, I'm trying to think, on the assured identity one, there's probably not as much there, but you know, assured identity is, like I said, it's an umbrella idea. It's an umbrella program. So we're looking at, you know, if your organization brings anything to the table in terms of just identity in general, right? So we are working right now very closely with the DoD CIO's office. And while I mentioned some of the experimentation we've done in the assured identity side, we're really looking at what is coming next after the CAC and how do we better augment the CAC as we go forward. So even, experience with identity management, and now they call it ICAM, Identity Credential Access Management. So any experience with ICAM, those kinds of things, that would be very beneficial to us.
Yeah, I'm interested in the prototyping that you were talking about. So at the end, what happens at the end of the prototyping? Is it, this is a great product, PM, go look at it? Or is it, this now gets on the APL? How detailed is the prototyping? What's the end state of something getting through that process?
So I think we're still defining that, and some prototypes we might run all the way through. Other times we might hand it off prior to the prototype. It could result in an APL, although on arriving on the APL, but I'd like to go further than that, because the problem is we can get it onto an APL, but the program might still never, they're likely not just going to reach in and grab it and go. We want something that where we want to prototype it in through the start of some sort of implementation in the program, versus just getting it onto a list and then wiping our hands. I'm worried that if we do that, we're not going to move the ball. It's, people will just do this, and then that program will be back into its old way of doing things, having never really gotten much further. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
Not to put you back on the spot, but we are very heavily focused in the machine learning and AI area. And we're even patenting some of our tools and capabilities. And so my question to you really is, how do you want to leverage that type of capability or technology? And is it mostly for big data analytics to analyze all the data that you're getting in, to be able to make sense of it, sort it, report on it, or do you have other ideas? And is it primarily right now structured and unstructured text-based data, or are you also looking at image files to be able to analyze?
Sure. So right now it's primarily structured and unstructured. And to your point about big data, yes, it's when we're looking at it from the cyber perspective, we run all of those sensors that are sitting there, and they're generating mountains of data. And we only have so many analysts, and we're not going to analyst our way out of this problem. And to make it even more complicated, we have, it's not even that it's one platform or one, we have one of our former colonels here called it vendor in depth, right? We have a vendor in depth problem. And so we have all these different vendor sets with different data types. They don't always the syntaxes don't always necessarily match up. So we're looking at a bit of AI in that direction, but then also, finding that needle in the haystack, or probably more appropriately, clearing away the haystack and looking for those patterns that a human's not going to recognize. And also the ability to cut down on an analyst's time while diagnosing an issue. I mean, it takes them hours to potentially, take an attack, find all the different binaries, the packet captures, all that kind of stuff, and then put it together and actually sit there and figure it out. It's not terribly efficient what we're doing now. And so we've got a project right now run out of our cyber directorate, but we're involved with it to take a lot of that machine learning or what can we take in terms of machine learning. Right now we're looking at supervised, but at some point maybe we'll get to unsupervised, but to start to build those models out. So that's the cyber side is probably the biggest place we're looking at it. When I mentioned it before with assured identity, those things are built into those products. When we did the thing with the behavioral analysis, we didn't build those models. That was built into the product. But it was an interesting event to learn a lot more about it. Same with the mobile phones. Again, that's built in at the hardware layer. So yeah, the cyber side is probably the biggest area that you could influence. And if you want to get us your info, we can through the channels get to the folks there in the cyber directorate that are working it. So sure, yes sir.
I know in the beginning you stated that this is not a DARPA. I'm not necessarily looking to be a DARPA, but having supported DARPA for a number of years prior to this, there are a couple of ways you can slice research and development, of course. So I'm looking to see, are you looking to sort of at the end of a small business doing all of the analytics and sort of coming up with prototypes, are you looking from us for more of a final report that sort of puts all that together? Or are you interested in entertaining how we can maybe pair with an industry partner that has maybe more of a hand in artificial intelligence, something of that nature, to further implement into that? So we're not necessarily turning it over to DISA saying, hey, these are the analytics, go forth and prosper. We're also going into the implementation side of that as well.
And so I'd say yes, it's more the latter, more the the implementation. We get a lot of reports around here. My email box is littered with reports, but oftentimes they fall on deaf ears, right? So what I don't want is a 6-month effort that results in a 300-page document. While I'm sure it'll be excellently authored and just thrilling to read, it'll go on a shelf and nobody will ever do anything with it. Yeah. So no, I am. My approach to things tends to be, I describe it as more blue collar. I want to get in there. I encourage my folks to get their hands dirty. I want to make a difference versus talking about making a difference, right? So in my mind, no, our integrations with small business or any business for that matter is more about what are we deploying at the end, what is tangible, and what is actually going to make a difference. Sure. Yes, sir.
I have 2 additional questions. One, consistent with this lady's question. I assume you go out to the various directorates and whatever and gather requirements. This is our problem. Here's what we're trying to solve. And then you do something against it. Are you guys ever going to publish some set of something more specific to this in terms of here's the requirements we're looking to do X, Y, and Z? That would help a lot of us actually come to you or come to the system with something a little more specific than software defined.
No, that would be interesting. I hadn't thought that far ahead towards publishing what we're finding with them. We are in the process right now, and it's one of the things is I'm trying to drive our folks to be more integrated. It's not just going and gathering the requirements from them and then turning around and doing something. It's actually being ingrained, and it's, to be frank, this sounds very squishy, but it's also about the personal relationships, with not even just with the tech directors in those given organizations, but down through the program offices and their engineers and that kind of thing. I hadn't considered, taking their requirements and publishing them out. It's something I'll let me take back and think about that one specifically, because sometimes a lot of the stuff that we're getting is frankly kind of raw, so we'd have to polish it a little bit more before we went and did something like that. But it's an interesting approach.
Well, I actually used to lead innovation for a large defense company, and one of the big things we always found was the gap was the big somebody understanding the problem in depth.
Yeah.
So you could bring innovation to that.
Yeah, and
lots of times the users aren't able to articulate that, and lots of times the technical people aren't to articulate. So the innovators have to kind of bridge that gap and be able to describe and understand it.
And that's actually been one of our challenges in the past, and I should have mentioned it earlier, is with transition. So what we'll have is we'll have some very smart folks going after problems that they perceive, and they'll be working their backsides off on it. But then when they're done and it's time to turn over, they look at the programs, and the program office says, well, I can't do anything with this. I don't know what you're talking about. This doesn't match what I need. And I've had a number of conversations with our folks about it's not just about, it's not about the best technology. It's often about the right technology for a given time and a given problem set. And you can't just sit in your cave and do your thing and think that at the end something magical is going to pop out and it's going to change the world. You've got to understand the fast-moving train that it needs to be paired up with. And so you're right. It's that interaction, and it's that the sitting with the engineers, sitting with the folks that are doing the day-to-day, sitting with the operations people. We have our own struggles around that. We talk a lot about. And actually, that was one of the other ones that I mistakenly grabbed an older set of slides, but I changed out. I think I actually changed out that one with DevOps, right? So we talk a lot about DevOps. We oftentimes just don't even have the basic relationships with the operators to understand what they're seeing day to day and be able to deliver on what they need. We'll build something, we'll toss it over the fence, and then they'll struggle with it. So, you know, DevOps is definitely a direction that we're headed in, and there's a lot of tool sets to help us get there. But more simplistically, even just having the basic relationships with the operators, so that we don't turn out something that's incredibly hard to manage, that kind of thing.
So more specifically in terms of requirements, what are you looking at in terms of voice cybersecurity? For instance, DoD public-facing telephony, where you've got people who can come and do voice surveillance of networks. They can do phishing on top of phishing and that sort of thing. Are you guys looking for solutions in that space?
I can't say specifically, but if you've got something that you think may be of interest in that area to us, then you know, I'd like to hear about it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
My understanding is majority of this, except for the browser isolation, is new to me, but the rest of them already exist. Are you more as scientific testing this to improve what already the agency is doing it, or is it a new phase of going cutting edge, a different direction as a scientific group? Is that what I'm sensing?
So it goes back to my flying cars versus self-driving cars, right? So it's a lot of times it's more about taking some things that are already going on out there in the rest of the world, or maybe even potentially within the agency, and either repackaging them or finding a different, more creative way to use them, right? So I had a thought pattern where I was going with that one, but it is. You're right. These we've had a lot of arguments internally about what is innovation, right? And we have one of my guys was hell bent on, well, if you're not creating something, then it's not really innovation. And our definition is probably a little more different than that. Our it's the creative use of technology. It's the creative use of process or procedure, whatever, to accomplish something more efficiently. It's not just about creating the light bulb or creating electricity or creating the telephone. It's finding a more creative way to potentially use those to solve a challenge set.
Second question I have is, you selected the 6. Is that current focus your team is going to focus and then solving certain problem involved with that and then move on to the next one, or is it?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing right now is the racking and stacking, right? So I've asked them for what's above the waterline, because the first list of projects that we came up with was about a mile wide and an inch deep. And there's no way that I could put that in front of any of my bosses and say, this is what we're doing, and they're gonna pick some things, and I'm going, yeah, well, we've thought about it, we spent about 5 minutes on it, and that's about the extent of it. There's a list of others that are below the waterline that we're probably, we're aware of, we're tracking, but we're focused less on. I mean, 5G is not up here, right? So 5G is one of those ones that we're tracking. We're looking at how it will change potentially the department, change our mission set, that kind of thing. But it's not something where, and I guess the waterline for us was 50% of a person's time, right? If somebody's not spending 50% of their time on something, it's not really a focus area for us. We might be doing it, but it's not above the waterline, if you will.
I guess, again, going back to the requirements piece and trying to understand what's driving the driver, if you will. But the agency is a service provider, and you guys, you've got this wide swath
Yes, we do.
customer sets out there.
Yes.
Who do you see, or I know there's more than one, but who do you see driving the drivers? Is it the Intel community, the certain COCOMs, Cyber Command? There's a I hate to even say a priority list, but there's some big guys in the room
Yes.
who are driving your programs, and everything gets tilted in those directions because of where dollars are coming from. So how do you
Not easily? Is that a good enough answer? It's not easy. And what's all the more interesting is our director, she wears two hats, right? JFHQ Doden and DISA. She's got two different, very important bosses in and of herself. So we're really looking at it from that perspective is, what are her priorities as we're moving out? Because clearly she's receiving them from her leadership. But we're also, we are listening to the COCOMs. This has got a very, we've got folks positioned at all the COCOMs out there and listening to what's going on out there. And that's one of the things that as this group matures, we are going to start a bit of a road show and go and hit the COCOMs and speak with the folks that are going out there. I'm leveraging some of the military personnel that are in our group to better understand from the services perspective and from the, the boots on the ground perspective, what's going on there, what's going on out there, what's needed, that kind of thing. At the end of the day, I look at our at my leadership chain that ends with our director, and we're looking at her for what's coming and from her leadership. But yes, we're taking input from everybody and then racking and stacking it and seeing where we need to go. But at the same time, in my mind, if we wait for a defined requirement set, we're late, right? So it's the old Henry Ford adage, if you ask people what they wanted, they tell you a faster carriage, right? So it's a portion of understanding what's going on out there. It's a portion of understanding technology, and then it's trying to factor those two together. But
I would like to maybe come in and talk from another perspective in that space, because I had the experience of being, actually, a little while ago, but being a DISA field office guy.
Oh, okay.
On the ground and understanding, being the resident moving target for DISA.
Yeah, you guys take a lot of shots. Yeah.
So there's how some of that stuff gets packaged and then targeted towards the agency, and how well and how fast you can work that problem.
Absolutely, and it's, in my mind, it's, you've talked about the service provider and the challenges of being a service provider, right? You need only look as far as your local electricity provider, or Comcast is a great example where they provide a swath of services, and if those services are working well, you don't think about it. You don't walk into this room and flip the light switch and think, oh wow, that's great, BG&E did their thing, right? You walk into the room, the lights come on, you go about your business. But you walk into the room, you hit that button, and those lights don't come on. That's when you get angry, and that's when all heck breaks loose. And so many times we are in a thankless position, but that's okay. That's our lot in life, and that's what we need to deliver. We need to communicate. I want to help the agency do a better job of that. So yeah, you guys were taking a lot of shots out there in the field, and it's partially understanding what's going on out there and getting ahead of that, I think, will make us more successful.
Dovetail what he's stating, specifically looking at your circle here and products or services you're working on. I'm specifically interested in an area of cross-domain solution. Is that in your bucket that you guys are looking at to move forward on?
Do we have any active projects in my group around cross-domain right now? No. Okay. Does that mean that we're not interested in where cross-domain is going? We are. So right now, cross-domain is run out of Teresa White's group in ID 2, I think they are. It's not a hot area that we're tracking, but if something popped there that we needed to get involved in, I think that we would. I also just don't want to throw bodies at problems, right? We have trying to grow our skill sets. We have a group with a specific set of skill sets right now. I wouldn't point at any of them, say that they're cross-domain experts, but it's an area that if something came there, we could potentially get involved in. But Teresa's the lead for the agency. Yes, ma'am.
What is your biggest pain point at this moment?
I got a lot of pain points at this moment. So probably the biggest pain point is is trying to think of the best PC way that I can say it. Our biggest pain point is frankly the talent pool, right? So, and that's not a slight against any of the individuals, but a lot of this stuff is diverse and fast moving. And our biggest challenge in my mind is the talent pool, both civilian and the contractor staff, which is again another reason why I like dealing with the small businesses, because you guys often bring, like I said before, a diverse thought to a challenge set, and things that, you know, we might get locked in and focused on a specific technology or the way to deliver that technology, and having somebody come in and say, well, actually, have you thought about it this way? You know, I think is big for us. It changes that dynamic. So I'd probably say that talent pool. I'd also say, you know, to be frank, this is a large agency, and there's a lot of ingrained processes and a lot of, you know, way of doing business. And a group that is to be focused on innovation struggles with that. You know, I've on more than one occasion gone and had I've gone awry of the process, and part of my job is to get my hands slapped and to do that kind of stuff. The other part of my job, when I first took the job in the cyber directorate, when we stood up the cyber innovation office, was I've reached out to one of my old mentors when I worked as a contractor before coming to DISA, and at a place where I felt like we did a lot of really cool and innovative things. And I asked him, I said, you know, what made that innovative? And one of his first things was he is the leader. It was his job to block a lot of the bureaucracy and let the folks do their thing. Get a trustworthy group, and then let them go to town, but guard them from that. So I'd say that's probably, you know, the working within a larger organization and trying to do something dynamic and innovative is a challenge as well. So, sure. Yes, ma'am.
Would you talk a little bit about your capacity or goals with regard to the number of prototypes that you plan to do or are doing within any given year?
Sure. So our group is about 25 people in total. We're about 25 people total. And as I mentioned, that bureaucracy thing, a number of them are, you know, we have to deal with finance and all that other kind of stuff. So people that are actually in the muck, if you will, that are supposed to be turning wrenches, I'd say it's about 10 to 15 of us are, you know, supposed to be doing things. So in terms of, you know, in a given year, how many will we do? It'll vary based on complexity. If we could turn out 5, I would say we're doing pretty well. But I also, it's going to vary. The where was it here? The mobile desktop convergence one, that's fairly easy. That's taking existing technology, a lot of things that are already laying around in the agency, and sewing them together and then pushing something out. Something like the browser isolation, we're about to go into a 100,000 user pilot across the department, which is going to take some heavy lifting. So, you know, it's going to vary. If we could turn out 5, I'd be ecstatic. We'll see where we're at. Talk to me next year and let's see where we're at. So we officially stood up in November. We are not official in the books. We're still working through to get everything, our reorg package approved. So there's still some stuff we're working out there, and probably that's slowing us down a little bit. But I'd hope that we'll be established come the March, April kind of time frame, and then we will really dive into things, and I'll really start pushing.
You mentioned Teresa is the lead for cross-domain. Who's your lead for command and control?
Command and control in the agency.
Teresa also?
For cross-domain command and control?
No.
Oh.
The command and control.
Oh, yeah, so that's not Teresa also. Teresa's strictly focused on cross-domain. We'd have to, I'd have to get that for you. So there's various people that come to mind for me in the ops organization, and so that's one we can, if maybe afterwards, just give me a little bit more detail about what you're looking for in terms of command and control, and we can help get you there.
Hi.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes.
You mentioned talent pool.
Yes.
We've been supporting the infrastructure director, what's now the infrastructure director, for years in strategic planning, DISA and technical evolution plan. It's great to see that DISA is standing up an organization for DISA agency-wide technology planning. Are you looking to get contractor support for your office, or is it really only going to be topic-based pilots?
No, so I think we will, well, in fact, I know that we will need sort of a generic, generic ability to get, you know, how should I say this? I'm not going to go every time we have a topic come up and let a new contract or that kind of thing. That'll kill us. I am looking for more of a jack of all trades kind of vehicle, if you will. I know we're still working through some components of SETI, and I'm really looking forward to SETI because I think SETI can help us with a lot of that. But yeah, what I want is a strong group of individuals. You know, if you get a good set of technologists, they can help you deliver on a wide range of things. You don't need a dedicated person for this or a dedicated, because they'll go out and in a weekend, they'll come back to you and, yep, I know how to, you know, maybe not scale to the entire department kind of thing, but they'll have a good sense and they'll bring it back to the table. So yeah, you know, that's hopefully within the next, I'm talking to a lot of my folks about doing just that. I can't go too far with it, but I am looking for something more generic, you know, just a consistent vehicle that we can use to spin up and spin down as we need.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure, sure. Any other questions? You guys let me off pretty easy. Oh, now comes a hard one.
Process is one thing that we do a lot, you know, program project management, staffing, and also as relating to technology. How much is the innovation process agile as you see it today, meaning the life cycle of an idea to a concept to a completion or otherwise? What is the, I guess, success rate, or how long does it take? You know,
so we're still fairly new, so I'd say right now we're batting 1,000. We're doing fantastic. So you're talking about the success rate of when we take an idea all the way through, we prototype it, and then we're out. That is actually one of the, I should have mentioned that when she asked her what are our biggest challenges questions. An innovation organization isn't going to succeed 100% of the time, right? And that's actually one of the cultural challenges that we have here, is that a lot of times there's, you know, you're dealing with the military. There is no defeat. You're gonna win, damn it. And but in terms of innovation, a lot of times you're not gonna succeed all the time. So I talked about the prototype that we did with the behavioral, looking into behavioral authentication, and that one failed. But it failed in terms of we didn't parlay it into a production capability. I would say, though, that it succeeded from the aspect that we learned an awful lot from it. We failed because we actually did it on a virtual desktop environment, and it was one of our concerns going in, and it was a concern that we had documented, but how the hypervisor would actually, you know, could create some problems when you're not having a direct interaction with the computer, but you're actually have that hypervisor as that middle tier, you know, as from my mechanical keyboard and mouse through to the virtual computer on the other side. What sort of things does that introduce? And we failed in that aspect of it. We also failed because the platform, you know, while it was a supervised learning platform, and it wanted you, as you saw. As it detected issues with a user, we were hitting about 90% success in terms of users, you know, being authenticated and continuing. We weren't locking them out. We could have, but that probably would have gotten me in a little bit of hot water. We were logging when we had a failure. And so what was happening was, and the vendor's response was, well, just go and interview the user and see if they're, see if they did anything bad, and if they didn't, then just mark it as good. But we were trying to do something a little bit more quietly. We were looking for, privileged users that were potentially sharing credentials, that kind of thing, and nobody's going to own up to that. So the vendor's response was, well, just go through and mark them all as they're okay. Well, now I just taught the computer bad behavior is okay. So there's, we learned a lot from that. We learned a lot about machine learning. We learned, about that, and we actually helped the vendor improve their product. So as we went, we were giving the vendor all that feedback. We were working with them very closely. Here's everything that's going on, a lot of the logging data, those kinds of things. We shared it all with them. And so they were able to then improve their product. And Army has since tested it. And Army's come back and said, yeah, okay, now it's good, it's ready for prime time. So at some point we might circle back, but that ability to admit defeat and learn from defeat that humility is something that we've really got to take on and introduce kind of into the culture.